Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt and welcome back to another short war summary. Today we are learning more news about the attempted coup in Russia, and over the past few days we've been reporting what's happening as it occurs. However, we haven't had a ton of details about the minor things that have been happening with it. But now we're starting to learn some very intimate details about what happened, who helped plan the coup, and who helped carry it out. So let's jump right into our first piece of news, which is on Twitter, and it's a post from Apex News. It looks like U.S. officials are trying to learn if General Sergei Surovikin, the former top Russian commander in Ukraine, helped plan Mr. Prigozhin's actions last weekend, which posed the most dramatic threat to President Putin in his 23 years of power. So it appears here that U.S. officials are alleging that this Russian general had advanced knowledge of Prigozhin's plans to rebel against Russia's military leadership. Now, if this is true, this is huge, because the entire time we were under the impression that it was an external attack by Wagner on Putin's government. If this turns out to be true, then it looks like the Russian government itself helped plan it and also helped carry it out to try to dethrone Putin. This makes the situation completely different than we thought previously, and also it lets us know that Putin's own government is trying to actively oust him. That's something we've speculated about for a few weeks now, but now we're starting to see some evidence that points to that might be the case. So this is the biggest story of the day, and we're watching this one very closely to see what else comes out about this one. So moving on to our next piece of news here, we have a statement from Gherkin, which was posted by Fytux News. And of course, Gherkin is a semi-reliable, pretty much untrustworthy source. However, this is something that caught my attention. Gherkin said it is reported that Prigozhin is currently in Russia negotiating, and in 2 hours he flies back to Minsk, and almost all of his council of commanders is also there. And this is important because yesterday we saw Prigozhin's jet leave Minsk and head back to Moscow, and we speculated that maybe Prigozhin was not on that flight and that only the jet was heading back to Russia. That would make sense because right now it would be very unwise for Prigozhin to return to Moscow because Putin is very, very much trying to dispose of him. But according to Gherkin, he actually might have been on that flight and was heading back to negotiate something. It's also it's unclear actually, what Prigozhin might have been negotiating. Perhaps he was negotiating the release of his family if they're still in Russian custody, because we did learn that during the coup attempt that apparently Putin had taken Prigozhin's family hostage as a way to get leverage over him to have him stop the coup. So this is very interesting. Got to keep an eye on this one as well. Not sure if it's true, and we'll have to watch it. Moving on to our next piece of news here, it's another post from Apex on Twitter, who says, Belarus wants Prigozhin's Wagnerites to train its army. And we were asking the question yesterday, why would Belarus offer military bases, old abandoned ones, and some land to allow Wagner to set up camp inside of their country? It really didn't make much sense to us. But now it appears that Lukashenko wants them to train their own military. And that tells us that Belarus's military must be in some very foul shape because the Wagnerites are not well trained whatsoever. As you can see here, these gentlemen right here are very scrappy. They're not exactly what you'd call special forces, and they're very ill-equipped and ill-trained. So if these are the people that Belarus is looking for guidance, they're in very bad shape. But with that little interesting piece of news out of the way, we're moving on to our next one, which is a post from the ISW. It's a piece of analysis about their take on what happened with the coup and what's trying to happen in the aftermath. It looks like they're saying that Putin is trying to present the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, as a corrupt liar, so that way they can try to destroy his reputation among Wagner personnel and within Russian society. So this would make a lot of sense because apparently Prigozhin still has a lot of pull with the Wagner. It's unclear exactly if that's been eroded or not since he's basically turned on them and gave up on the coup, but we'll have to see over time. Another piece of interesting analysis from the ISW is down here in the fifth post, which says Putin has likely decided that he cannot directly eliminate Prigozhin without making him a martyr. So the Kremlin is going to continue to attack his character to break his popular support and try to discourage Wagnerites from following him to Belarus. And the problem with this, in my opinion, is that Putin is not exactly a saint in the eyes of the Russian people himself. And in fact, over the last few days, we've seen Putin resort to threatening the Russian population not to rise up, or otherwise he's going to crush them. So I'm not sure if these attempts are going to work that well. And to me, it symbolizes the fact that Putin really does not know how to handle this issue, and he's trying his old, basically, KGB manipulation tricks to see if he can try to get Prigozhin basically losing support with his own people. Not sure if that's going to work, but we'll have to see. Moving on to our next piece of news here. This is a funny piece of news. The Russian Interior Ministry General Alexander Trenikov, and I'm probably butchering that, was involved in a serious ATV accident, and he's in the hospital in critical condition. And most of us are going to immediately say, this looks like one of those Russian falling out of a window tricks. And in my opinion, the timing is very suspicious. The guy getting on an ATV and getting in a very serious accident, an accident so bad that he ends up in critical condition in the hospital at a time when a coup just happened, that seems rather unlikely to me. We know the Russians like to make accidents out of basically assassination attempts. We've seen people fall out of windows, they've fallen down stairs, they've fallen off of boats, banged their head and washed up on the shore. So to me, this is another attempt to get rid of someone who apparently might have been causing some trouble, but we don't know for certain. And moving on to our next report here, we have one from Knoll Reports, which says a number of Chinese companies stopped and still have not resumed their deliveries to the Russian Federation after Prigozhin's mutiny, as they are not sure of the stability of the country. And if this is true, that means that Xi Jinping believes that Putin's days might be numbered in his government, and that they paused their relationship for the time being to wait and see what happens. And at this time, Russia really cannot afford that, because they only have a limited number of allies that are helping them out with this war. China is one of them, and Iran is another big one. Of course, they have a few smaller ones along the way, but I think they can't afford the risk of losing China's support in this situation. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. As we know, this is a very, very one-sided relationship here. We know what Xi's trying to do. He's trying to get in Putin's good graces at a time of need, so that way he can try to manipulate him. And also Putin thinks he's trying to manipulate Xi, so they both think they're trying to pull tricks on one another, and in the end, they're probably both going to end up screwing themselves over. But moving on to our next post here, it's actually some pretty good news about support going to Ukraine. And this is from the Kyiv Post. And he said the U.S. announced a new $500 million military aid package for Ukraine, including 30 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 25 Stryker armored personnel carriers, and ammunition for HIMARS and Patriot. And this is great news. Obviously, $500 million is not the biggest support package we've ever sent to Ukraine, but it's still a sizable amount. We've also seen the Ukrainians using those Bradleys very effectively on the battlefield over the last few weeks, and it seems like they're taking a very strong liking to them, and they're wielding them very effectively. So, very good to see that happening. Also, to see ammunition for the HIMARS and Patriot, that's important as well, because right now Russia is still trying to yield its air superiority in Ukraine as an advantage over the Ukrainians, and it's very important that we supply the Ukrainians with air defense to make sure they can properly counter that until we get them some F-16s, which we need to go ahead and get over there to Ukraine. So moving on to our last piece of news here, kind of a disappointing piece of news, sadly. It says Switzerland has banned the sale of 96 Leopard 1 A5 tanks to Ukraine. And of course, Switzerland has been flip-flopping quite a bit on their neutrality. It appeared for a minute that they might be passing some legislation to basically do away with their neutrality for now, so that way they can send equipment to Ukraine. I was very hopeful for that, but it looks now that the Swiss Parliament has rejected a bill known as Lex Ukraine, which would allow third countries to transfer Swiss-made weapons to Ukraine. So, very disappointing piece of news, and sadly, Ukraine won't be getting these 96 Leopard tanks, which would probably be a huge help on the battlefield because, of course, Switzerland is neutral. Not much we can do about it, and also I'm not going to gripe about Switzerland being neutral. There are benefits to it. However, right now in the short term, it seems to be a downside. But of course, that's probably going to be a contentious debate down in the comments, and feel free to leave your comment down there about it and how you feel about it. So with that being said, that is our last piece of news for the short war summary. Of course, we'll cover this more in depth on our stream tonight, and we'll be watching in the meantime to see if any more news comes out about the coup attempt or anything else occurring in Ukraine in the meantime. So if you haven't, please subscribe and like to our YouTube channel and on this video as well, and go over to our Twitter page and peep that Twitter and give us a follow over there as well. If you want to keep up to date with the news as it occurs, we post it on our Twitter page, and that is the fastest way to keep up with it. So, of course, thank you all for watching this video, and bye-bye for now.